A.1.4. Are anarchists socialists? Yes, all branches of anarchism are opposed to capitalism. This is because capitalism is based upon oppression and exploitation, see sections B and C. Anarchists reject the notion that men cannot work together unless they have a driving master to take a percentage of their product, and think that in an anarchist society, the real workmen will make their own regulations, decide when and where and how things shall be done. By so doing, workers would free themselves from the terrible bondage of capitalism. End quote. We must stress here that anarchists are opposed to all economic forms which are based on domination and exploitation, including feudalism, Soviet-style socialism, better called state capitalism, slavery, and so on. We concentrate on capitalism because that is what is dominating the world just now. Individualists like Benjamin Tucker, along with social anarchists like Proudhon and Bakunin, proclaimed themselves socialists. They did so because, as Kropotkin put it in his classic essay Modern Science and Anarchism, so long as socialism was understood in its wide, generic, and true sense as an effort to abolish the exploitation of labor by capital, the anarchists were marching hand in hand with the socialists of that time. End quote. Or, in Tucker's words, the bottom claim of socialism is that labor should be put in possession of its own, a claim that both the school of socialistic thought, state socialism, and anarchism agree upon. End quote. Hence, the word socialist was originally defined to include, all those who believe in the individual's right to possess what he or she produced. End quote. This opposition to exploitation or usury is shared by all true anarchists and places them under the socialist banner. For most socialists, the only guarantee not to be robbed of the fruits of your labor is to possess the instruments of labor. End quote. For this reason, Proudhon, for example, supported workers' cooperatives where, every individual employed in the association has an undivided share in the property of the company because by participation in losses and gains, the collective force, i.e. surplus, ceases to be a source of profits for a large number of managers. It becomes the property of all workers. End quote. Thus, in addition to desiring the end of exploitation of labor by capital, true socialists also desire a society within which the producers own and control the means of production, including, it should be stressed, those workplaces which supply services. The means by which the producers will do this is a moot point in anarchist and other socialist circles, but the desire remains a common one. Anarchists favor direct workers' control and either ownership by workers' associations or by the commune. See section A.3 on the different types of anarchists. Moreover, anarchists also reject capitalism for being authoritarian as well as exploitative. Under capitalism, workers do not govern themselves during the production process nor have control over the product of their labor. Such a situation is hardly based on equal freedom for all, nor can it be non-exploitative, and is so opposed by anarchists. This perspective can best be found in the work of Proudhon's, who inspired both Tucker and Bakunin, where he argues that anarchism would see, capitalistic and proprietary exploitation stopped everywhere, and the wage system abolished, for either the workman will be simply the employee of the proprietor capitalist promoter, or he will participate. In the first case, the workman is subordinated, exploited. His permanent condition is one of obedience. In the second case, he resumes his dignity as a man and citizen. He forms part of the producing organization of which he was before, but the slave. We need not hesitate, for we have no choice. It is necessary to form an association among workers, because without that, they would remain related as subordinates and superiors, and there would ensue two castes of masters and wage workers, which is repugnant to a free and democratic society. End quote. Therefore, all anarchists are anti-capitalist. If labor owned the wealth it produced, there would be no capitalism. End quote. Benjamin Tucker, for example, the anarchist most influenced by liberalism, as we will discuss later, called his ideas anarchistic socialism and denounced capitalism as a system based upon, open quote, the usurer, the receiver of interest, rent, and profit, end quote. Tucker held that in an anarchist, non-capitalist free market society, capitalists will become redundant and exploitation of labor by capital would cease since, open quote, labor will secure its natural wage, its entire product, end quote. Such an economy will be based on mutual banking and the free exchange of products between cooperatives, artisans, and peasants. For Tucker and other individualist anarchists, capitalism is not a true free market, being marked by various laws and monopolies which ensure that capitalists have the advantage over working people, so ensuring the latter's exploitation via profit, interest, and rent. See Section G for a fuller discussion. Even Max Stirner, the arch-egoist, had nothing but scorn for capitalist society and its various spooks, which for him meant ideas that are treated as sacred or religious, such as private property, competition, division of labor, and so forth. So, anarchists consider themselves as socialists, but socialists of a specific kind, libertarian socialists. As the individualist anarchist Joseph A. Labadzie puts it, echoing both Tucker and Bakunin, open quote, it is said that anarchism is not socialism. This is a mistake. Anarchism is voluntary socialism. There are two kinds of socialism, archistic and anarchistic, authoritarian and libertarian, state and free. Indeed, every proposition for social betterment is either to increase or decrease the powers of external wills and forces over the individual. As they increase, they are archistic. As they decrease, they are anarchistic. End quote. Labadzie stated on many occasions that, open quote, all anarchists are socialists, but not all socialists are anarchists. End quote. Therefore, Daniel Guérin's comment that, open quote, anarchism is really a synonym for socialism. The anarchist is primarily a socialist whose aim is to abolish the exploitation of man by man, end quote, is echoed throughout the history of the anarchist movement, be it the social or individualist wings. Indeed, the Haymarket martyr Adolf Fischer used almost exactly the same words as Labadzie to express the same fact, open quote, every anarchist is a socialist, but every socialist is not necessarily an anarchist, while acknowledging that the movement was, open quote, divided into two factions, the communistic anarchists and the Proudhon or middle-class anarchists, end quote. So, while social and individualist anarchists do disagree on many issues, for example, whether a true, that is, non-capitalist free market would be the best means of maximizing liberty, they agree that capitalism is to be opposed as exploitative and oppressive, and that an anarchist society must, by definition, be based on associated, not wage, labor. Only associated labor will, open quote, decrease the powers of external wills and forces over the individual, end quote, during working hours and such. Self-management of work by those who do it is the core ideal of real socialism. This perspective can be seen when Joseph Labadzie argued that the trade union was, open quote, the exemplification of gaining freedom by association, and that, without his union, the workman is much more the slave of his employer than he is with it. End quote. However, the meanings of words change over time. Today, socialism almost always refers to state socialism, a system that all anarchists have opposed as a denial of freedom and genuine socialist ideals. All anarchists would agree with Noam Chomsky's statement on this issue, open quote, if the left is understood to include Bolshevism, then I would flatly dissociate myself from the left. Lenin was one of the greatest enemies of socialism, end quote. Anarchism developed in constant opposition to the ideas of Marxism, social democracy, and Leninism. Long before Lenin rose to power, Mikhail Bakunin warned the followers of Marx against the quote-unquote red bureaucracy that would institute, quote, the worst of all despotic governments, end quote, if Marx's state socialist ideas were ever implemented. Indeed, the works of Stirner, Proudhon, and especially Bakunin all predict the horror of state socialism with great accuracy. In addition, the anarchists were among the first and most vocal critics and opposition to the Bolshevik regime in Russia. Nevertheless, being socialists, anarchists do share some ideas with some Marxists, though none with Leninists. Both Bakunin and Tucker accepted Marx's analysis and critique of capitalism, as well as his labor theory of value, see section C. Marx himself was heavily influenced by Max Stirner's book The Ego and Its Own, which contains a brilliant critique of what Marx called vulgar communism as well as state socialism. There have also been elements of the Marxist movement holding views very similar to social anarchism, particularly the anarcho-syndicalist branch of social anarchism. For example, Anton Pannekoek, Rosa Luxemburg, Paul Matic, and others who are very far from Lenin. Karl Korsch and others wrote sympathetically of the anarchist revolution in Spain. There are many continuities from Marx to Lenin, but there are also continuities from Marx to more libertarian Marxists, who were harshly critical of Lenin and Bolshevism and whose ideas approximate anarchism's desire for the free association of equals. Therefore, anarchism is basically a form of socialism, one that stands in direct opposition to what is usually defined as socialism, i.e., state ownership and control. Instead of central planning, which many people associate with the word socialism, anarchists advocate free association and cooperation between individuals, workplaces, and communities, and so oppose state socialism as a form of state capitalism in which, open quote, every man and woman will be a wage receiver and the state the only wage payer, unquote. Thus, anarchists reject Marxism, what most people think of as socialism, as just, open quote, the idea of the state as capitalist, to which the social democratic fraction of the Great Socialist Party is now trying to reduce socialism, end quote. The anarchist objection to the identification of Marxism, central planning, and state socialism capitalism with socialism will be discussed in section H. It is because of these differences with state socialists and to reduce confusion that most anarchists just call themselves anarchists, as it is taken for granted that anarchists are socialists. However, with the rise of the so-called libertarian right in the USA, some pro-capitalists have taken to calling themselves anarchists, and that is why we have labored the point somewhat here. Historically and logically, anarchism implies anti-capitalism, i.e. socialism, which is something we stress that all anarchists have agreed upon. For a fuller discussion on why anarcho-capitalism is not anarchist, see section F.